Secretary, Secretary, Military, Military, Afghan, Afghan, Secretary, Afghan of Navy Vet, Secretary, Afghan, Afghan, Afghan,
Secretary, Afghan, Afghan, Secretary,
Afghan, Secretary, 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 Secretary,
Afghan, Taliban, Taliban, military, Afghan, Afghan, military, military, Afghan, military, Afghan, 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 military, Afghan, 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 military,
Secretary, Secretary,
Afghan, Afghan,
Secretary.
Together. Afghan, 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 Afghan,
Afghan, Taliban,
Afghan, military, Afghan, Afghan,
Afghan,
Secretary, military, Afghan,
Afghan, military, Taliban, Taliban, Taliban,
Afghan, military, Afghan, Afghan, military, Afghan, military, military.
Secretary, military, Taliban, 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 military, Secretary, Taliban, Secretary, Afghan, Taliban.
Let me move
over the air, Taliban,
Afghan, military, military, Afghan, military, military.
Afghan,
For terror.
Afghan,
Secretary, Secretary, Afghan, Afghan, Secretary, Afghan, the Taliban, Afghan, Taliban, Taliban, Secretary, Secretary,
the Secretary.
Or was he?
Secretary has done no wrong, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary, military, Taliban.
Secretary, Secretary, Afghan, Taliban, and
Afghan, Afghan, Taliban, Afghan,
Secretary, military, Afghan,
Afghan,
Secretary, Secretary, military, Afghan, Afghan, military, military, Afghan, military. Taliban, Afghan, military.
Secretary,
Afghan, military,
Taliban, Afghan, Afghan, Afghan,
military,
Secretary, Taliban, Taliban, Secretary,
Taliban,
Secretary, Secretary, Taliban, Afghan.
Secretary, military, 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 Taliban, Afghan, secretary, Taliban, secretary,
Secretary, Secretary, Secretary, Secretary, Secretary,
Secretary,
Taliban,
Taliban, Taliban, military, Secretary,
Afghan, military, Afghan, Afghan,
Taliban,
Afghan, Afghan, Taliban, Afghan,
Secretary,
military,
Secretary, Secretary,
Secretary, Secretary,
Mr. Secretary, Taliban,
Taliban, Taliban,
Taliban,
Afghan, Afghan,
Taliban, Afghan, Taliban.
Secretary, Taliban, 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 Secretary, Taliban, and Afghan, Afghan,
Secretary, Secretary, Afghan, Afghan, Afghan.
Taliban, Afghan, Taliban, Secretary, Taliban, Taliban,
Taliban,
Secretary, Secretary,
Secretary, Afghan,
Afghan, military,
military, military.
military,
secretary is the
Military, 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 Taliban, Afghan, Taliban, Secretary, Taliban, 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 military, Taliban,
Afghan,
Secretary, Taliban, military, Taliban, Taliban,
military,
Secretary.